Good evening. I want to welcome everyone. Come on in and find a seat. Grab a songbook. Turn to song number 539. Song number 539, Higher Ground. We'll sing the first, second, and last. I'm pressing on the upward way, new heights I'm gaining every day, still breaking as I onward bound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. My heart has no desire to stay where doubts arise and fears dismay, though some may dwell where these abound. My prayer, my aim is higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. I want to scale the utmost high and catch a gleam of glory bright, but still I'll pray till heaven I found. Lord, lead me on to higher ground. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's stable land, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground.
Welcome, welcome. Welcome to all members and visitors. If you're visiting with us today, please fill out a visitor card that you will find on the pew in front of you. And just scan the code and give it to somebody in the back as you leave. If you're a first-time visitor, there are bags in the back. Take one of those, please. They're for you. A new quarter of classes is going to start Sunday, September 1st. A visitation group will meet next Tuesday, September 3rd at the building at 9:30 a.m. Ladies' Bible class will start back up again on Wednesday night, September 4th, not night, at 10 a.m. Men's lunch, Catfish King. You got it? Does he remember?
Yeah, Bill, he said
Okay.
11:30.
11:30. There we go. Game night will be next Friday night, September 6th at 6:30 p.m. On our prayer list, Deborah Dew, hopefully she's not here, was diagnosed with shingles. Please pray for her. Neil Kemp passed away today. Please keep his friends and family in your prayers. Pat Fleming's still having issues, but she's here. Or no, that's not Pat Fleming. After her procedure, please continue to keep the Flemings in your prayers that both are struggling with health issues. Please pray for Christy Harding. They're going through issues at this time. And if you get a chance, go see T. Bolin. He has had an operation to learn how to balance a ball on the top of his toe. And he has a picture of the first time he did it. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for the rain, the change in the weather. We thank you for things that you've given us, and we ask you, Lord, to always let us be aware of those things. Especially make us aware of the opportunities that you provide to us to do your will and to open the eyes of others. Help us to always try to do your will in our lives so that we may impact others. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good evening. We had a nice rain shower out at Granville. Only Woody and I know where Granville is, I think. That's out at Hudson. If you look on a map, it actually says Granville. I think that's an old name of the area out there, 2497 and 94. That's where Granville is. So, but Woody knows because he asked me how everything is at Granville sometimes. So, but good to get a rain shower today. It's very refreshing. We're going to continue in Luke tonight. You may recall last week we were at a point where Jesus, the apostles were with him. They were out on Sea of Galilee, Lake Gennesaret, and the storm came up, and he was sleeping, and we talked about the lesson that they learned about getting their faith deepened, and the fact that he was helping to prepare them. And so tonight we're going to start in chapter 8, verses 26 through 37, where they are actually on the other side of the lake, in a region of the Gerasenes. And so where you are is almost straight across the lake from where most of his ministry has been in Galilee. And I'm going to read this because this is one of our dear brothers at Porter's. I think it's his favorite Bible story because he can't keep from laughing when he imagines the end, of this story. But so they sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him, and they begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and the countryside. And the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away, told all over town how much Jesus had done for him. So imagine the disciples' reactions here. They've just been out on this lake in a storm, thought they were going to drown, everything's calm, and then they get to the other side, and there's a naked man running around screaming. So, it's one thing after another. They're saying, wow, what an adventure, kind of they were on. But if we do, let's compare this demon situation to what we had seen in Luke 4:31 through 36. And I remember Lynn asked the question, said, it goes back and forth, right? It says it was a singular voice, and then it talks about them being multiple demons. Same thing here. Right? We hear a voice said, "What do you want with us?" Then it said, they said, "Don't throw us into the abyss." And even ask, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion." So, some would suggest that it just is referencing many. Some would try to link it to Legion in the army and how many that count is. And that's possibly a stretch. But what we know is that once again, the demon recognizes Jesus for who he is as the Son of God, and he's quietened. Because once again, Jesus doesn't want the demons acknowledging who he is at this time. We see that the Gerasenes are not receptive. And this was not very long after we had seen the parable of the soils. They definitely fit into one of those categories about the fact that they were not receptive at all. Because the entire area asked him to leave. Really not just those who owned the pigs, but it was kind of the entire area. And so this same story, it's a little more detailed in Mark's account in Mark 5:1 through 20, because it mentions that it was 2,000 pigs. And this is where my brother Thomas Wisdom, when he hears this story, he said, "I'm just imagining 2,000 pigs sprint toward the hillside, going off the edge into the water and drowning." That's significant. That's not like, hey, I cast it over here and here's 4 or 5. 2,000. That's a significant demon possession, that this person had, to the point where, tore loose chains and, did all of this stuff. And it's interesting, too, in that Matthew mentions that it was 2 men. But we only see that it's mentioned as a man here in Luke, and also in Mark, probably defining that they're just talking about the more prominent of the 2. So what we see is, that they were not receptive. So Jesus didn't say, "We're going to stay and force our way through here." He said, "They're not receptive. We will go." But we also see that he left the healed man in the area to tell his story. And he went around and he did tell his story. He wanted to leave with Jesus, but Jesus left him there. One thing interesting is that, what about pigs and Jews? They go together? Not at all. But this is not Galilee. It's across the lake in a somewhat Gentile area. So apparently pigs were okay here to be raised, and we also know that some people in this area, they would raise pigs for the Romans. So that's kind of how this story would tie together, and with the 2,000 pigs there. As to what the use might be around for that. So very interesting. We've gone from almost being capsized and being worried about that to, wow, these people aren't receptive, and we just saw 2,000 pigs run over the hill and dive into the water. So very interesting. Then we see that they returned back to the other side of the lake. Crowd welcomed them. And then Jairus, a synagogue leader, his daughter was sick, and Jairus approached him. And Jesus was going to go heal his daughter. And on his way, it says that the crowds. Go ahead, T. Sorry.
Verse 39, it says, return to your home and declare how much God has done for you. Excuse me. What I find interesting is, in some earlier accounts of what Jesus had done for some, he said, tell no one what I did. I don't understand why he would tell them not to say anything, but tell this one to tell others. Can anybody help me understand that?
Kerwin and Catherine have answers for you.
Well, didn't you just say that this was a Gentile area? So it was Gentiles versus the Jews? He would tell the Jews, don't tell anybody, but the Gentiles to go tell. Am I wrong? I mean, the area?
Yeah, I think it's it could be about the timing and the preparedness. Kind of when he has told some folks, I know there's some times where he doesn't want the message misconstrued, and we'll get a little bit, but go ahead, Kerwin.
Yeah, that's kind of the same lines I was going to go on. This is a Gentile area. It's fairly evident because of the pigs. And here's this Jew, he crossed the lake just to kill all our pigs. So, he's going to go tell, and no one else is, there's not going to be a bunch of Jews come ask the guy, hey, what'd the guy do? Because there's probably not a lot of Jews there. This was just a seed planted across the lake by Jesus.
And he would have stayed and told more had they been receptive.
An old adage, people will believe when pigs fly. Didn't happen here.
Okay, a couple of questions. First of all, do we ever see any examples of Christ telling somebody, don't tell, when they didn't tell?
I don't think of many.
I have to believe that Jesus knew that people they're going to talk. They're going to tell what's going on. And my next observation and question is, why wasn't there some outrage going on? That had to be 2,000 pigs, has to be somebody's livelihood.
It was a stock market crash.
Well, pork bellies just went down. I mean, so there had to be, and you don't hear anything about, where the people tinged in them ran away and told, but who did they tell, and were they upset about it? And what's the difference from the demon's standpoint of being cast into the abyss, which they begged him not to do, and going into the swine who then die? What's the difference there?
They didn't have any idea that the swine were going to die. Go ahead, Catherine.
Well, with the Jews, wouldn't there have been outrage that Jesus was proving that he was the Son of God with this power, but the Gentiles not having that background possibly and knowing about Christ and all would have looked more at this as he's some sort of powerful magical type source, something like that. So maybe there was more fear that, he could do something to us rather than anger and...
Yeah.
Yeah, but anger that he's proving the Son of God and he's going to take, the Pharisees saying, well, he's going to take away from us our power.
I don't know if I'm following, but
You don't follow?
I'm not following you. I'm sorry.
I was just, we were talking about why wasn't there anger? I'm thinking that there was not anger there because these were Gentiles and they didn't possibly have the background of knowing about Christ and his teachings. And we know that the Pharisees and the Jews were becoming very upset because of those teachings, that he's blasphemous and he's not the Son of God. So maybe these Gentiles thought of him more as being a sorcerer or some sort of powerful magician type person that did this rather than the Son of God.
Sure. It said fearful. It didn't say. It didn't describe anger, but it could have been that they wanted to. He wanted to disclose the fear of something like that, and even though, sure, we would understand they just lost their livelihood and various things, but they asked him to leave pretty much out of fear of what had just occurred.
You think they had fear toward the Romans? You mentioned that they may have been keeping the pigs for the Romans, and I'm sure that Romans wouldn't be happy if they lost. I mean,
Well, that's just
to me, when I
2,000
read
pigs that the Romans don't have to buy.
it is a little confusing because when you read it, to me, it seems like they're afraid of Jesus, but it was a miracle toward good. So it's kind of confusing when you read it.
Yeah, it is. And the fact that they just didn't accept, they didn't accept what had happened as something that they wanted to participate in. And so essentially they, based upon their non-receptiveness, Jesus just said, and we see later, right? He says, if somebody's not receptive, he told the disciples, what? Just dust your feet off, leave that area. Don't try to force it. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, if we're conjecting here, I'm going to go ahead and conject. So looking at the text, so we have this hilltop, and there's pigs up there, and these guys are watching their pigs. They see Jesus and his clan get up out of the boat, walk up, talk to this guy. One guy says to the other guy, "Hey, what do you think they're doing down there? This guy isn't killing him. He's being normal." Then they were speculating. They're like, "What? What's going on here?" And all of a sudden, their pigs start squealing and run off. The man's normal. Guys go back to the village, tells them everything that happened. They verify that this person was demon possessed, who's been scratching himself and all that, isn't doing it anymore. Town comes over, see what's going on. This is where I'm going with this. The people are stunned, and they just want Jesus out of there.
Yeah.
They just want him out. You killed the pigs, you healed this man. We don't know who you are, but we don't want you in our neighborhood. We just want you to go away. I think we're kind of looking too much into the Romans and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's just basic human,
Human nature.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't say that anybody else came around to be healed or had the messaging being there, whatever. This was just just like you say, stunned, fearful, and didn't want these guys to stay. So appreciate all the comments. So they're back, and Jairus has asked about healing his daughter. And as he's headed that way, the crowds are pressing in, and the woman was subject to bleeding. She said that if she could just get to Jesus, she felt like that she could be healed. So when the crowds are packed in, a lady that is deemed unclean because of the situation that she had, she gets to Jesus somehow through the crowd, touches the hem of his garment. She feels the physical healing, and he feels something go out of him. Now this, I'm not suggesting that Jesus only had so much power that after a certain number of touchings he couldn't heal anybody else. That's not what this means here. But he felt it from a standpoint of that he knew something had occurred. And so he said, "Who is it? Who touched me?" Then everyone denied. And Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding in and oppressing against you." Like, hey, what do you mean somebody touched you? There's all these people. Sure, all this jostling, somebody has touched you. And Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know what power has gone out from me." Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet in the presence of all the people. She told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Let's stop at that part, and then we'll come back to Jairus here in a minute. This woman was in desperation. It said she had had this condition for 12 years. She had spent everything she had on doctors trying to get well. Some of the Gospels say she got worse. Yeah, I mean, medical conditions in those days, they couldn't deal with this. But she had tried everything to get well. She couldn't go into the temple because she was unclean. She didn't have the opportunity every month to, for 7 days and then be clean and go back into the temple because of her situation. She was unclean and couldn't go there. She was taking a great risk just by hustling into the crowd, because if somebody recognized her, they could have really gotten on to her for just going into the crowd, doing all this touching, because she was banned. She was likely unmarried, not saying that she wasn't married, but she was unclean, based upon her condition. But she had faith that Jesus could heal her if she just touched the hem of his garment. She knew she was healed when she touched him, because it says she felt the healing and she knew that she was. Jesus felt the power leaving him. So why did Jesus stop? The crowd's going. It's all around him. He knows she's been healed. She knows she's been healed. But Jesus provided her an opportunity to publicly exhibit her faith so that she could be spiritually healed and made whole, and not just physically healed. This showed the crowd that he had the ability to overcome the physical uncleanliness of the old law, like he had done with the leper and the dead, raising the dead and some other times. But here's what I find the most significant. He called her daughter. The first and only instance of Jesus calling a woman daughter that's documented in the New Testament. Further teaching that he was the Son of God. So he used this opportunity to go beyond the physical healing, to go to the spiritual healing, and allow her to declare her faith, but then also extended it to the point where calling her daughter. Go ahead, Paul.
This is a wonderful, wonderful story right now. And it reminds me of Psalms 51, verse 17. It reads, "The sacrifice of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise." And I think that's where she was, broken. And so when she touched Jesus, being, the Father has sent him, he knew. Mm-hmm. And there was no other sacrifice. He knew that it's all she had. And, that's where I think that the, all that came from, is that broken spirit.
Now let's go back to Jairus. So he's going to heal her daughter, his daughter, and this occurred, what we just talked about, occurs. Jesus had just called her daughter. While he was speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, and remember, he's a synagogue leader. That's his role. He's Jairus, a synagogue leader. Said, your daughter is dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore. It's too late. You know, she's not sick. She's passed. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed. Then he went to Jairus' house. He did not let anyone go in except Peter and James and John, the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She is not dead, but asleep. Then let's see what happened. They laughed at him. They laughed at what Jesus said. Said, he took her by the hand, said, my child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. Right, T? So we see here that Jairus, they said, forget it. She's gone. Jesus said, believe and she'll be healed. And then people are laughing, but that didn't even deter Jesus. What's interesting is none of them got to go inside and see her get raised. Only Peter, James, John, Jesus, and her two parents. Yeah. So they didn't get to observe all of that. But he just pushed right on through the ridicule and went in and raised her. So here again, once again, Jesus, he touches someone unclean. He's taken them way past that. He's taken the Jews and the Jewish leaders, Pharisees, Sadducees, way past this physical uncleanliness. He's done it several times. And and his teaching continues to head towards spiritual cleanliness and all of that. But he's used all of those examples, and we don't see anyone even suggesting anymore. Before, in some of the early times, they'd say, if he knew who was touching him and all of that. We don't see any of those type things in any of these more recent ones. Go ahead, Woody.
Everett, one of the things that kind of popped in my mind was the example of the woman touching the cloak. And we see examples in Matthew and Mark where he talks about people were healed just by touching the hem of his garment. And we see her demonstrating. It's a physical manifestation of her faithfulness because it's not the cloak that she's believing is going to heal her, right?
Right. That's right.
And in the same way, this next scenario, if you look in Galatians 2, where he talks about, Paul's talking about the justification through faith, it gives you another sense of the same thing, but this is during the time when Christ walked the earth, where their faith is being put in him. And it gives us an idea and understanding, because no matter how good you live, you still fall short. And we all need healing. And through Christ is where we're going to find it.
Yes, sir.
I need a little clarification on the young lady that's dead. In verse 51, it says, when he came into the house, he permitted no one to go in except Peter, James, and John, and the father and mother of the girl. Now all wept and mourned for her, but he said, do not weep, she is not dead, but sleeping. And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead. But he put them all outside. Okay, who did he put outside? The only ones that he allowed in were Peter, the way it reads, it almost sounds like Peter, James, John, and the parents ridiculed him. Because how could he put them outside if the only ones that were allowed in were Peter, James, and John were the parents. And he put them all outside, took her by the hand, and called, saying, "Little girl, arise." So nobody got to go in except Peter, James, and John and the parents.
And then he sent them out.
And then it says they ridiculed him. Well, who is they there? It can't be the crowd. They're outside. And it says, and they ridiculed him, knowing she was dead. And he put them all, and then he put them all outside. He can't have put the crowd outside. They weren't allowed in the first place. Is that how Matthew reads it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I based upon the
But you
order
see-
in Luke, I can see what you're saying.
Okay.
So, but I'm really thinking everyone was in the house mourning, and he basically took them into the Peter, James, and John, the parents, into the room where she was, and sent everybody else out of the house. You know, Lynn, I'm not going to be able to explain how Jairus was ridiculing Jesus and he raised his Not that he couldn't, but I'm having a hard time with that one. Okay, let's move into chapter 9. And this is where Jesus sends out the 12. This is some folks call this, or some versions, they'll highlight it and say, this is the limited commission, basically the first time that he has sent them out on his own. And later on we know he sends out 72, but he calls the 12 together. He gave them power he gives them the ability now to drive out demons, cure diseases, do the things that he has been able to do. Then he says, take nothing for the journey, no staff, no bag, no bread, no money, no extra cloak. Whatever house you enter, stay there till you leave that town. If people do not welcome you, leave their town, shake off the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. So they left and they went village to village. If we look in Matthew 10, it gives a much more detailed account about this. It suggests that they went out in pairs. He'll name them, he'll name two, then the next two. And it suggests that he sent them out in pairs when he sent them out. We know he did that when he sent out the 70 or the 72. And in Matthew, it really talks about that Jesus gave them encouragement and some direction, promised them the Spirit's guidance. Essentially, he said, as you've seen me do, go and do that. That's but to find a welcoming family, in other words, if they find somebody and they teach and they're receptive, find one of those houses to stay in and stay there until you leave that area. Don't be trying to go and beg for food and various things from the town and things. Look for people that are receptive and let them take care of you as you perform my ministry. Then we see also that all this is going on, and Herod, it says, is perplexed. And he's starting to hear about Jesus. He's hearing various versions of who Jesus was, because the apostles now, they're covering some ground. They're now split up. It's not just everybody with Jesus. They're going out on their own and preparing the message. And he's actually hearing that some say John had risen from the dead. He's just killed John the Baptist. Some that Elijah had appeared, and that some the old prophets had risen again. And it's going to be very interesting in that that's what he's hearing. And then when the apostles come back, said, who's everybody saying that I am? The exact same thing. Some say John the Baptist. Some say Elijah. Some say the prophets. And if we go to 9:18 through 27, that is really where that is. Jesus was alone praying. As he was alone praying, his disciples joined him, and he asked them, "Who do the crowd say that I am?" So they answered and said, "John the Baptist, some say Elijah, others say that one of the old prophets has risen again." Then he asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered and said, "The Christ of God, or God's Messiah." That's how Luke interprets that. Matthew 16 has this account, Mark 8 has it, and then Luke 9 we're looking at. You know, they're in Caesarea Philippi, although Luke doesn't mention that, the others do. Jesus is questioned on the people's opinion. It's the same in all three accounts. Peter's answer, and we know that Peter answered. Peter often answered for all of the apostles. We see that time. So this isn't suggesting that Peter's the only one that thought that. He just happened to be the spokesperson, for them. And in you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. As we see that, piece in Matthew. And that we hear most often, where he said, "You're the Christ, the Son of the living God," and then Jesus confirms, and I said, "I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." That's the one that we hear the most, out of Matthew. In all three of the versions, accuracy. And then he predicts his suffering, rejection, killing, and resurrection. But he mentions his resurrection only in Luke. So if we go back up to verse 21, he strictly warned and commanded them to tell this to no one, saying, "The Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised the third day." So now that they've gone on their mission, they've come back, and they answer, "Who do you say that I am?" They're recognizing that he is the Son of God because they're acknowledging that. He now begins to give them more and more of the story. He's very, very soon, there's going to be the transfiguration, and they're going to be heading toward Jerusalem. He's going to be heading to Jerusalem for the last days and the crucifixion. I skipped Jesus feeds the 5,000 back in 10, just kind of a flow. We've all heard that story many times, so we'd just kind of move on through it. But I find it interesting that is the only miracle that's in all four Gospels. It is the feeding of the 5,000. It's worded a little different, in the various ones, but they've come from feeding the 5,000, and then that's where. Then they've moved off a little bit, and Jesus huddles them, and they've just seen this miracle again. They've just seen that as well. So, all right, how much time we have, Scott? 1 minute. All right. I don't know if we can do the transfiguration in 1 minute, but we're going to get started. This is in Luke 9:28 through 36. It's also recorded in Matthew 17 and Mark 9. And I'll read it real quick, and then we'll talk about it. Now it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings that he took Peter, John, James, and went up on the mountain to pray. As he prayed, the appearance of his face was altered. His robe became white and glistening. And behold, 2 men talked with him, who were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his decease, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. But Peter and those with him were heavy with sleep. But when they were fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. Then it happened, as they were parting from him, that Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. There again, Peter, very impulsive, felt like he needed to do something. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them. They were fearful as they entered the cloud, and a voice came out of the cloud saying, This is my beloved Son, hear him. When the voice had ceased, Jesus was found alone, but they kept quiet and told no one in those days any of the things they had seen. So I'm going to just go through some things here for a couple of minutes, if you'll let me, so we can go ahead and get this part done. I'm teaching one more week next week, and then Greg is going to take up from where we get to next week. But this could be an entire lesson in itself. But the Transfiguration's God's next step in preparing Jesus for the road to Jerusalem and death on the cross. We can compare this to, Moses was up on Mount Sinai. Came down, his face was, bright, except Jesus' mission was superior to that. The disciples were in awe. We see Peter, James, and John. That inner circle, they get to go do a lot of things with Jesus. Peter later wrote about the radiance that he saw in either 1st or 2nd Peter. I can't remember which one it was. But Jesus mentions in Matthew and Mark that he didn't want them to tell anyone what they had seen. And so just to kind of paint a picture of the time and where the apostles still were, they didn't really understand what had taken place. Jesus, Moses, and Elijah were speaking about his departure. Only in Luke does it talk about his decease, about his death. So we actually have Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. And what did Peter do? He interrupted. He's seeing all this going on, and he said, hey, let's make some tabernacles. See, this was about the time of the Feast of Booths, where they would get together and they would build these little small coverings, and they would stay there a week, and they were remembering, the Jews being taken care of in the wilderness. So it's about this time. So, hey, Peter's got it solved. That must be what we need to do. We got Elijah here. We got Moses here. We'll just let's go ahead and take care of this. So what did God have to do? Intervened and put a cloud there and got all that shut down. But Moses and Elijah, it represents, that Jesus is the fulfillment of all those things. So Moses is here, Elijah's here, and they're looking at the culmination now, that Jesus is providing for that. I think Peter saying it is good for us to be here is probably the largest understatement in the Bible. He goes, hey, he's in awe. He said, it is good for us to be here. And then he wants to go and do something. That just shows that he didn't really understand. Peter and the rest were thinking of Jesus on the mountain more like Moses on Sinai and Elijah on Mount Carmel. Just a couple other things. There's some verses in Matthew and Mark that right after this that mention that the apostles had some confusion about Elijah coming first, because they said, hey, we thought Elijah was coming first. Jesus had to explain to them, John the Baptist was who you're thinking about from that Elijah that is going to come first. They were still thinking about an earthly kingdom, because on the road leaving here, they were arguing about who would be the greatest. They're still thinking physical kingdom. And then the last one, just kind of that they didn't fully understand this. They're making the trek toward Jerusalem. They're going to go through Samaria. Jesus sends somebody ahead, and they didn't accept it because they know Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. And what did the sons of thunder say? hey, you want us to call down fire from heaven? Because they've just seen Elijah on the mountain. So they're thinking, Elijah called down fire from heaven, back when he was to burn up the altar and the incense. So 3 times shortly after this, we get a hint that they're still thinking, they're still trying to figure all of this out. And, they've seen it, but they don't fully understand it. Jesus is telling them the message. They're still trying to tie in this physical kingdom, old law, Moses, Elijah, all of these things we've heard. But they're going to get the picture, but they are closer than anyone else on earth because Jesus is teaching them, but they don't yet have it. They don't yet understand it. And we can't knock them for that. I mean, just think if you were in that situation and how it would be so difficult to take what you've known and take that and package it into what is coming. So anyway, it's just interesting. I thought that there's several things that suggest that they're taking the timing of what they know and this transfiguration and really trying to figure it out. So thank y'all.